200,000 years. That's how long the world stayed silent. No paintings, no tools, no voices carried across the wind. Just nothing. What happened to the humans who lived before memory began? Tonight, we travel back beyond history, beyond myth, into the quiet chasm of time the Earth forgot to record. This is the story of the 200,000-year gap in human history. No one can explain. You are standing at the edge of forever, watching dust dance in shafts of morning light. The archaeologist's brush moves with surgical precision, sweeping away grains of sand that have waited 40,000 years to tell their story. Each stroke reveals another fragment of bone, another whisper from the deep past, another piece of a puzzle that refuses to complete itself. Feel the weight of the earth beneath your feet. Layer upon layer of compressed time, each stratum a chapter in the longest book ever written. You are reading backwards through the pages of existence, searching for something that should be there but isn't. The silence is deafening. The dig site stretches before you like an open wound in the landscape. Careful grid lines mark where human ambition meets geological patience. Students kneel in squares of measured earth, their tools scraping against stones that remember when continents were different shapes, when ice covered lands that now burn under desert suns. They are hunting ghosts. Listen to the rhythm of discovery, the soft whisking of brushes against bone, the gentle tap of dental picks against fossilized wood, the hushed conversations that drift across the excavation like prayers in an ancient language. This is the sound of humans trying to remember who they were before memory began. Dr. Sarah Chen holds a fragment of skull in her palm, turning it slowly in the light. Her eyes carry the weight of questions that keep archaeologists awake at night. This piece of bone once cradled thoughts we can never know, dreams that dissolved into dust before the first pyramid was imagined. She places it carefully in a labeled box, another artifact in humanity's incomplete autobiography. You sense the magnitude of what is missing. Imagine a library where most of the books have been erased, leaving only scattered pages and mysterious blank spaces. Between 200,000 and 40,000 years ago, our ancestors lived and died and loved and feared, but they left almost nothing behind. No art adorns their cave walls. No complex tools speak of sophisticated minds. No graves reveal reverence for the dead. It is as if imagination itself was sleeping. The wind carries the scent of distant rain across the excavation. It has been carrying that same scent for millennia, watching civilizations rise and fall, witnessing the slow dance of evolution that brought consciousness into being. The earth remembers everything, but it keeps most secrets buried, beneath layers of time and forgetting. Feel yourself descending through those layers now, past the artifacts of recorded history, past the traces of agriculture and settlements, past the scattered remains of early humans who painted bulls on cave walls and carved Venus figures from mammoth ivory. Deeper still, into the long silence that preceded the explosion of human creativity. What were they doing during those missing millennia? What thoughts flickered behind eyes that reflected the same stars we see today? What songs did they sing around fires that left no trace in the geological record? The questions echo through the dig site, like wind through empty caves. As the sun climbs higher, shadows shift across the excavation. The archaeologists work with the patience of stone itself, knowing that truth reveals itself slowly, one grain of sand at a time. They are time travelers armed with brushes and sieves, searching for clues to humanity's greatest mystery, the silence before the symphony began. You watch a young graduate student carefully extract a piece of worked flint from the earth. It is crude, functional, made by hands that knew only survival. Compare this to the sophisticated spear points that appear suddenly in the archaeological record 40,000 years later, works of art as much as tools. Something profound happened in that gap between then and now. Something that changed everything. The whisper of stone grows louder as the day progresses. Each artifact speaks in a language older than words, telling stories of hunger and hope, of hands that shape tools and hearts that beat with the same rhythm as yours. But the story has chapters missing, pages torn from the book of human experience. The greatest mystery is not what we found, but what we lost. Close your eyes and travel backward through the mists of deep time. You are walking across the African savanna as it was 200,000 years ago, when the earth was younger and humanity was just beginning to understand what it meant to be human. The grass whispers secrets in languages that predate speech itself. Feel the warmth of ancient sunshine on your skin. This is the light that illuminated the first moments of modern human consciousness. The same photons that witnessed our species taking its earliest breaths. The sky stretches endlessly overhead, painted in shades of blue that existed before there were words for colors, before there were minds capable of naming the beauty they beheld. A small band of humans moves slowly across the landscape, perhaps 20 individuals, their dark skin glistening with the honest sweat of survival. They carry no possessions beyond simple tools of stone and wood, yet they carry something infinitely more precious, the spark of awareness that will one day build cities and compose symphonies and send rockets to distant worlds. Watch them as they pause beside a stream that has long since vanished into geological memory. The water runs clear and cold, reflecting clouds that will never form again in exactly the same way. A woman kneels to drink, her reflection rippling with each sip. In that reflection lies the future of consciousness itself, though she cannot know it. Their leader, if such titles existed in a world without hierarchy, studies the horizon with eyes that hold both caution and curiosity. He is perhaps 30 years old, ancient by the standards of his time, his body bearing the scars of countless encounters with predators and elements. His mind, though capable of language and abstract thought, operates within boundaries we can barely imagine. Listen to their voices carried on the evening wind. They speak in sounds that hover between animal calls and true language, concepts struggling to find form in the twilight of human communication. They have words for danger and food, for kinship and direction, but not yet for wonder, or longing, or the strange sadness that comes from contemplating one's place in an infinite universe. As darkness falls, they gather around a fire that casts dancing shadows against the gathering night. The flames flicker with hypnotic rhythm, and in that rhythm lies the heartbeat of all future human endeavor. Around this fire, children learn the names of stars and the patterns of seasons. Knowledge passes from generation to generation, like a torch that must never be allowed to die. But something is different about these flames, compared to those that will burn 40,000 years later. These fires warm bodies and cook food and hold back the darkness, but they do not illuminate cave walls adorned with painted animals. They do not light workshops where artists carve intricate figures from bone and antler. They burn purely for survival, not yet for beauty. You sense the weight of potential that surrounds this small group. Within their DNA lies the code for Michelangelo's David and Einstein's equations, and every poem that will ever move a human heart to tears. Yet that potential remains locked away, waiting for some cosmic key to turn in the lock of human imagination. The night deepens, and one by one they settle into sleep beneath stars that burn with the same light we see today. Their dreams, if they dream, are simple affairs of food and safety, and the warmth of familiar bodies. They do not yet dream of gods or afterlives, or the possibility that consciousness itself might be the universe's way of understanding itself. In the morning, they will break camp and continue their eternal migration across landscapes that time will transform beyond recognition. They will hunt and gather and make love and raise children and die, leaving behind only the faintest traces of their passage. A footprint in dried mud, a broken spear point, a scatter of bones that will wait 200,000 years to tell their story to archaeologists who barely exist in the realm of possibility. Feel the poignancy of their forgotten lives. Each individual in this small band possesses the same capacity for joy and sorrow as any human who has ever lived. They feel the warmth of sunshine and the bite of cold wind. They know the comfort of friendship and the ache of loss. Yet their experiences vanish into the silence of deep time, like ripples on a pond that has long since dried to dust. This is the forgotten dawn of human consciousness, a time when awareness flickered like a candle in the vast darkness of prehistory. They are our ancestors in the most literal sense, carrying in their genes and hearts the seeds of everything we would become. Yet between their simple existence and our complex civilization lies a gap so profound that it challenges our understanding of human nature itself. The fire burns lower as the night advances, its light growing dimmer until only glowing embers remain. Soon even these will fade to ash, leaving no trace that warmth and light once pushed back the darkness in this particular place, at this particular moment. Like the lives of those who tended it, the fire becomes memory, then legend, then silence. You are holding two stones, separated by 160,000 years of mystery. In your left hand, a crude chopping tool chipped from volcanic rock by fingers that knew only the most basic requirements of survival. In your right hand, a leaf-shaped spear point so perfectly crafted it seems to sing with artistic intention. Between these two artifacts lies one of the most profound puzzles in human history. Feel the weight of the earlier tool. Its edges are rough, functional, made by hands that understood the basic principle of sharp versus dull, but had not yet discovered the deeper mathematics of proportion and symmetry. This is technology in its infancy, when innovation moved at the pace of glaciers and new ideas appeared, perhaps once in 1,000 generations. Now examine the later artifact with the reverence it deserves. Every flake has been precisely removed to create edges that could cut through hide and sinew with surgical precision. The balance is perfect, the symmetry deliberate. This is not merely a tool, but a work of art, created by a mind that understood beauty as well as utility. The leap between these two objects defies explanation. What happened to the human mind during those missing millennia? Why did imagination sleep for almost 200,000 years before awakening with such sudden brilliance? The question haunts laboratories and lecture halls around the world, a riddle wrapped in the enigma of human consciousness itself. Dr. Marcus Webb studies cognitive evolution at the university, where time seems to move differently, where researchers can spend entire careers pursuing single questions. His office walls are covered with timelines and charts that map the glacial progress of human innovation, then its explosive acceleration beginning around 40,000 years ago. The pattern is unmistakable, but the explanation remains maddeningly elusive. Consider the possibilities that keep scientists awake at night. Perhaps a genetic mutation occurred, a subtle rewiring of neural pathways that suddenly allowed abstract thinking to flourish. Maybe it was environmental pressure, climate catastrophe, forcing rapid adaptation. Some theorists propose that language itself reached a critical threshold, allowing complex ideas to be shared and refined across generations. The population bottleneck theory suggests that humanity nearly went extinct around 70,000 years ago, reduced to perhaps 10,000 individuals, scattered across Africa and a few other continents. When populations are small and stressed, genetic changes can spread rapidly through the gene pool. Could survival itself have accidentally triggered the awakening of human creativity? You walk through galleries of human prehistory where the evidence speaks in whispers and gaps. The early period shows steady, almost boring, technological progress. Stone tools improve incrementally over hundreds of thousands of years. Fire is mastered, then controlled. Basic shelters are constructed. But the leap to symbolic thinking, to art and music and spiritual beliefs, happens with shocking suddenness. Consider what was missing from those earlier minds. No cave paintings recorded the hunt or honored the spirits of animals. No carved figurines suggested concern with fertility or death or the mysterious workings of the human heart. No elaborate burials indicated belief in afterlife or the sacred nature of human consciousness. It is as if the human imagination simply did not exist. Then, around 40,000 years ago, everything changed. Cave walls exploded with color and movement. Tools became works of art. Bodies were buried with ceremony and grave goods. Musical instruments appeared, suggesting that humans had not only discovered beauty, but learned to create it themselves. The transformation is so complete, it seems like a different species entirely. The Great Silence, as some researchers call it, may have been broken by the invention of fully modern language. When humans learned to manipulate symbols with complete fluency, when metaphor and abstraction became possible, the floodgates of creativity burst open. Language did not just allow communication, it made thinking itself possible in ways we can barely comprehend. Or perhaps the answer lies deeper, in the emergence of what philosophers call theory of mind, the ability to understand that other beings have thoughts and feelings different from one's own. This cognitive revolution would have made art meaningful for the first time, creating the possibility of communication across the barriers of individual consciousness. You sense the frustration of researchers who study these questions. The archaeological record offers only fragments, scattered clues to a transformation that may represent the most important event in the history of consciousness. Computer models attempt to recreate the cognitive leap, but the mind resists simple explanation. Some mysteries may be too profound for science to fully unravel. The vanishing of the human mind into that long silence grows more puzzling the deeper you probe. These were not primitive apes, struggling toward awareness, but fully modern humans, with brains identical to our own. Their skulls show the same capacity for complex thought that produced Shakespeare and Einstein. Yet for 160,000 years, that capacity remained largely dormant. Recent discoveries hint at earlier stirrings of symbolic behavior, ochre pigments used for body decoration, perforated shells that might have been jewelry, but these tantalizing glimpses only deepen the mystery. Why did creativity flicker so briefly before the long sleep? What conditions were necessary for imagination to finally take permanent root in human consciousness? The silence before the awakening becomes more profound the more we contemplate it. Millions of humans lived and died during those missing millennia, their thoughts and dreams lost forever. They were us in every meaningful sense, yet separated from us by a cognitive chasm that seems unbridgeable. Understanding what they could not think may be the key to understanding what makes us human. Step into the vast emptiness between remembering and forgetting, where time moves, like honey, through amber, and human consciousness exists in a twilight state that defies our understanding. You are suspended in the great silence, that profound gap in human experience when our ancestors walked the earth but left almost no trace of their inner lives. Feel the weight of 200 millennia pressing down around you like deep ocean water. This is not the absence of life, but the absence of memory itself. Humans breathe and hunt and love and die, but their experiences dissolve into the vast forgetfulness of deep time like salt into an infinite sea. Each generation lives fully, then vanishes without echo. The earth breathes differently during this period. Continents shift with geological patience, while ice ages advance and retreat across landscapes that will one day support great cities. Mountains rise grain by grain while forests spread and recede in cycles that dwarf human comprehension. Time operates on scales that make individual lives seem like sparks in an endless night. You watch countless generations pass like waves breaking on an eternal shore. Each wave carries the same potential for consciousness, creativity, and transcendence that defines modern humanity. Yet each retreats into nothingness without leaving permanent marks on the sands of history. It is as if the universe itself is dreaming, and humans exist only in the dream's margins. Listen to the silence that surrounds these vanished lives. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of meaning preserved across time. No songs survive from this period, because no one thought to carve the melodies into bone or stone. No stories echo across the millennia, because narrative itself had not yet discovered its power to transcend the moment of telling. A woman tends her child beside a river that has since changed course a dozen times. Her love is as fierce and protective as any mother who has ever lived, yet it leaves no trace in the archaeological record. Her lullabies fade into the wind. Her teachings die with her voice. The wisdom she accumulated through years of survival vanishes when her heart stops beating. The landscape itself becomes a character in this story of forgetting. Caves that will one day blaze with painted animals remain dark and unmarked. Cliffsides that future humans will cover with petroglyphs stand blank as pages waiting for the invention of writing. The earth provides endless canvases for human expression, but the artists have not yet awakened. You sense the profound loneliness of this period. Not loneliness in the social sense. These humans live in tribes and form bonds and care for one another with the same intensity as any people who have ever existed. But the loneliness of consciousness that cannot yet speak to itself across time. Each generation must discover the world anew, because knowledge dies with its keepers. Consider the dreams of a hunter stalking prey across savanna that will one day become city streets. His understanding of animal behavior rivals that of any modern tracker, his knowledge of plants and weather patterns encyclopedic. Yet this wisdom exists only in his living brain, impossible to preserve or pass down, except through demonstration and imperfect mimicry. The great silence encompasses not just the absence of art and complex tools, but the absence of external memory itself. These humans carry their culture in their bodies and voices alone. When an elder dies, entire libraries of knowledge perish with them. Innovation occurs, but it spreads slowly and often dies out before taking permanent root. Imagine the frustration of insights that flash briefly into consciousness, then vanish forever. A young person discovers a better way to shape stone or start fire or track game, but lacks the symbolic language to communicate the discovery effectively. The innovation survives only as long as its inventor, then disappears back into the silence from which it came. You witness the birth and death of countless small traditions. A group develops a particular style of tool-making or a specific hunting technique, but without external means of preservation, these cultural advances exist in a state of constant entropy. They arise from human ingenuity, flourish briefly, then fade back into the general pool of forgotten knowledge. The weather of consciousness during this period is different from what we know. Thoughts arise and dissolve like clouds in an empty sky. Memory operates, but only in the immediate sense of personal experience and basic survival information. There is no historical consciousness, no sense of progress or decline, no conception that things could be fundamentally different from how they have always been. Rivers run through valleys carved by earlier rivers, following paths that echo the forgotten meanderings of waterways lost to time. The metaphor applies to human consciousness itself during the Great Silence. Each life follows patterns established by earlier lives, but the connections remain invisible. Innovation happens, but it does not accumulate. Progress occurs, but it does not build upon itself. Feel the poignancy of this vast forgetting. Every sunset watched by human eyes was as beautiful as any we see today, yet none were preserved in painting or poem. Every act of love and courage and sacrifice was as meaningful as any recorded in history, yet all have vanished into the silence. The Great Silence is not empty, but full of lives, lived completely, but remembered not at all. The world breathes on, patient and eternal, while human consciousness exists in a state of perpetual dawn that never quite becomes day. The potential for everything we recognize as civilization sleeps in the minds and hearts of people who die before that potential can be awakened. Time itself becomes the only witness to this vast, unremembered human experience. You are standing at the threshold of the most remarkable transformation in human history, watching as consciousness awakens from its long slumber and begins to dream in colors that have never existed before. The silence that has held for almost 200,000 years is about to break with the sound of humanity discovering its own voice. Feel the electric tension in the air around 40,000 years ago, as if the universe itself is holding its breath. Something is stirring in the human mind, something that will change the very nature of existence on this planet. The first artists are approaching cave walls with pigments ground from ochre and charcoal, preparing to shatter the darkness with light. Deep beneath the earth in what will one day be called France, a young person raises a torch toward limestone walls that have waited millions of years for this moment. The flame flickers, casting dancing shadows that seem almost alive. In the wavering light, inspiration strikes like lightning, and the first intentional image begins to take shape on stone. Watch as the first brushstroke appears, crude but deliberate, marking the exact moment when human consciousness learns to speak to itself across time. This is not just art. This is the birth of external memory, the first time human thoughts will outlive the brain that conceived them. The cave wall becomes humanity's first library, its first museum, its first attempt at immortality. The pigment flows like liquid time, carrying meaning from one mind to another across the vast gulf of centuries. A bison materializes on the wall, its form captured with an understanding of movement and life that speaks of deep observation and deeper empathy. The artist has looked into the eyes of the living animal and seen not just prey or predator, but a fellow being deserving of representation. You sense the magnitude of this moment reverberating through time like ripples from a stone thrown into still water. This first painted animal represents the emergence of symbolic thinking, the ability to let one thing stand for another, to create meaning beyond immediate necessity. The human mind has learned to play with reality itself. Other figures begin to appear in caves scattered across continents. Handprints pressed against stone-like signatures in humanity's guestbook. Animals running and leaping with lifelike grace. Abstract symbols that might represent stars or seasons or concepts too complex for modern minds to decipher. Each image is a victory over forgetting, a declaration that human experience matters enough to preserve. The transformation is not limited to art. Tool-making undergoes its own revolution, producing implements so sophisticated they seem to sing with purpose. Spear points become exercises in perfection, their symmetry so precise that modern flint knappers struggle to replicate them. Beauty and function merge into objects that serve both body and soul. Listen to the first music echoing through ancient valleys. Bone flutes carved with careful attention to pitch and harmony, their melodies carrying human emotion across the barrier of individual consciousness. For the first time, humans can share not just information, but feeling itself, creating communal experiences that bind groups together in ways that transcend mere survival. The dead begin to receive ceremonial burial, their bodies arranged with care and surrounded by objects that suggest belief in continuation beyond death. Flowers are scattered over graves, the first evidence that humans recognize death as more than simply the cessation of biological function. The concept of the sacred enters human consciousness like dawn breaking over a landscape that has known only night. You witness the birth of what archaeologists call behavioral modernity, but the term fails to capture the profound mystery of what actually occurred. The human brain did not suddenly evolve new structures. The genetic code remained essentially unchanged. Yet somehow, perhaps through the emergence of fully syntactic language, or the development of theory of mind, consciousness achieved a critical mass that ignited an explosion of creativity. The great silence breaks not with a whisper, but with a symphony. Across continents and cultures, humans begin creating, decorating, symbolizing, and meaning-making with an intensity that suggests something fundamental has shifted in the nature of awareness itself. The species that had walked the earth for 200,000 years suddenly learns to fly. Feel the awe that must have accompanied these first creative acts. The artist painting by torchlight, the musician discovering harmony, the toolmaker achieving perfect symmetry each must have sensed they were participating in something larger than themselves, something that connected them to forces beyond the immediate demands of survival. The cave walls begin to tell stories, sequential images that suggest narrative thinking has emerged. Time itself becomes a medium for human expression as past, present, and future merge in the flowing lines of painted animals. The artist can capture movement, freeze a moment of life, and preserve it for viewers who will not be born for thousands of years. Jewelry appears in the archaeological record, beads and pendants that serve no practical purpose beyond ornamentation and self-expression. For the first time, humans care how they appear to others, suggesting the emergence of complex social cognition and aesthetic sense. Identity becomes something that can be crafted and displayed, not merely lived. You stand witness to the moment when humanity discovers it has a soul. The evidence appears simultaneously across the globe, in forms too numerous and varied to catalogue: art, music, ceremony, decoration, sophisticated technology, and burial practices that speak of belief in transcendence. The species that had lived for millennia, without leaving traces of inner life, suddenly erupts in creative expression. The first silence ends not because humans learn to make noise, but because they learn to make meaning. In that difference lies everything that separates us from our earlier selves and connects us to the divine spark of consciousness that makes existence itself a work of art. The long sleep is over. Humanity has finally awakened to its own possibilities. You are standing on the edge of annihilation, watching the sky turn to ash and darkness. 74,000 years ago, the earth convulses with a violence that threatens to erase the human story before it has truly begun. Mount Toba, a sleeping giant in what will one day be called Indonesia, awakens with the fury of a wounded god and reshapes the very nature of existence. Feel the tremor that begins deep in the earth's molten heart, a shudder that travels through rock and time to reach the surface world, where early humans gather around fires that will soon seem pitiful against the cosmic cold descending upon them. The mountain has been building pressure for millennia, and now it releases that energy in a single, world-altering moment. The explosion tears through the atmosphere with the force of 1,000,000 nuclear bombs, hurling billions of tons of ash and debris into the stratosphere. You watch the sun disappear behind a veil of volcanic winter that will persist for years, perhaps decades. The sky becomes a grey tomb, and within it, humanity faces its first great test of survival. Darkness falls across continents, like a curtain drawn over the stage of human development. In Africa, where our species first learned to walk upright and speak in the earliest forms of language, small bands of survivors huddle in caves that become arcs of consciousness, floating in an ocean of ash. The temperature plummets, plants wither and die, animals flee or perish, leaving the landscape barren as an alien world. Listen to the silence that follows the great eruption, not the peaceful quiet of a forest at dawn, but the terrible hush of a world holding its breath, waiting to see if life itself will continue. The survivors speak in whispers, as if loud voices might bring down what remains of their crumbling world. Their children learn fear before they learn words. You witness the great forgetting beginning. Without abundant food to support large populations, human groups shrink to handfuls of individuals scattered across vast, hostile territories. Knowledge that took generations to accumulate vanishes when its keepers die. The techniques for making sophisticated tools are lost. The early experiments with symbolic expression fade from memory, like dreams upon waking. The volcanic winter stretches on, season after season of grey skies and bitter cold. Rivers freeze that have never known ice. Forests become graveyards of skeletal trees reaching toward a sun that provides no warmth. The survivors adapt or die, but adaptation comes at a cost that will echo through millennia. In the caves where humans once gathered to share stories and perfect their crafts, families now cluster for mere warmth. The elderly die first, taking with them the accumulated wisdom of lifetimes. Then the children, too young to understand why the world has turned against them. The lucky few who survive grow hard and focused on the immediate demands of staying alive. Feel the profound loss that occurs during these dark years. Languages disappear when their last speakers succumb to cold and hunger. Cultural traditions die out when there are no longer enough people to maintain them. The early stirrings of human creativity, the first attempts at art and music and ceremony, are forgotten as surely as if they had never existed. The genetic bottleneck tightens like a noose around the future of consciousness itself. Perhaps only 10,000 humans remain alive on the entire planet, scattered in small groups that have no contact with one another. Each group becomes an island of awareness in a sea of ash, their knowledge and customs evolving in isolation or disappearing entirely. Imagine the psychology of survival during these terrible years. Hope becomes a luxury that few can afford. Planning beyond the next meal seems pointless when the world itself appears to be ending. The survivors focus on the immediate and practical, finding food, staying warm, avoiding the predators that still roam the changed landscape. The great forgetting is not just about lost artifacts or extinct technologies. It is about the erasure of human potential itself. Stories that might have inspired future generations are never told. Innovations that could have accelerated human development are never conceived. The very capacity for abstract thinking seems to contract under the pressure of simple survival. You sense the weight of contingency pressing down on these dark years. If a few more groups had died out, if the climate had remained hostile a little longer, if disease or despair had claimed just a few more survivors, the human story might have ended before it truly began. Consciousness itself balanced on a knife's edge, one breath away from extinction. The ash falls like snow that never melts, covering the traces of earlier human achievement. Campsites, where people once gathered to perfect their tools and share their knowledge, disappear beneath layers of volcanic debris. The landscape becomes a blank slate, wiped clean by forces beyond human control or understanding. Children born during the volcanic winter know only struggle and scarcity. They learn to live day by day, never imagining that their species once showed promise of something greater. The great forgetting shapes their minds as surely as it shapes the world around them, teaching them that survival is the highest aspiration consciousness can achieve. Yet somehow, impossibly, life continues. The survivors endure not because they are stronger or smarter than those who perished, but because they refuse to surrender to the darkness. In the most desperate moments, when extinction seems certain, something deep in the human spirit insists on continuing. The ember of consciousness refuses to be extinguished. The volcanic winter begins to lift after years of twilight. The ash settles. The sun's light grows stronger. Plants begin to sprout from the enriched soil. But the survivors who emerge from their refuges are profoundly changed. They are the inheritors of forgetting, carrying within them only fragments of what humanity once knew about itself. The great forgetting serves as both catastrophe and catalyst. It erases the past, but creates the conditions for a new beginning. The humans who survive the volcanic winter will eventually reawaken to their creative potential, but they will have to rediscover everything their ancestors lost. In that rediscovery lies both tragedy and triumph, the endless human capacity to begin again. You are walking through a world populated by ghosts, stepping carefully through landscapes where multiple forms of human consciousness once breathed the same air and gazed upon the same stars. The earth remembers them all: Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and others whose names have been lost to time and extinction. They were our siblings in the family of awareness, and their stories intertwine with ours in ways that still echo in our DNA. Feel the strange intimacy of shared ancestry as you encounter the traces of these vanished peoples. In the caves of Europe, Neanderthal fires burned with the same warm light as our own. Their hands, broader and stronger than ours, shaped tools with skill that speaks of deep intelligence and patient teaching passed from generation to generation. They were not the brutish caricatures of popular imagination, but fully human in every way that matters. Listen to the silence where their voices once filled valleys with calls and songs and laughter. They spoke to each other in languages we can never recover, shared jokes and stories, and dreams that died with their last breath. Their children played games that no child will ever play again. Their lovers whispered endearments in sounds that no ear will ever hear. The Neanderthals possessed brains larger than our own, housed in skulls that suggest a capacity for thought and feeling, as rich and complex as any consciousness that has ever existed. They buried their dead with ceremony, arranged bodies with care, and surrounded them with flowers and tools for the journey beyond life. They understood death as more than mere cessation, which means they understood life as more than mere biology. You sense the weight of parallel evolution, the profound mystery of consciousness developing along multiple paths toward the same destination. While our ancestors painted caves in Africa, Neanderthals were creating their own art in European caves, marking walls with symbols and handprints and images that speak of minds capable of abstract representation. Two forms of awareness discovering themselves simultaneously across vast distances. In the mountains of Asia, the Denisovans left their own traces of sophisticated culture. A single fingerbone and a few teeth are all we have of their physical presence. But their genetic legacy lives on in the peoples of Melanesia and Southeast Asia. They were master jewelers, crafting ornaments from bones and stones, with techniques so advanced that modern artisans struggle to replicate them. The boundaries between these species blur like watercolors in rain when you examine them closely. Neanderthals and modern humans shared enough genetic similarity to produce fertile offspring. Denisovan DNA flows through modern populations, carrying with it the memory of different ways of being human. We are not one species but many, not a single stream of consciousness but a braided river of awareness. Imagine the meetings between these parallel humanities, perhaps cautious encounters, at the edges of territories, groups studying each other across valleys, filled with mutual curiosity and apprehension. They would have recognized something familiar in each other's eyes, the spark of consciousness that transcends physical differences. Yet, they remained separate, developing distinct cultures and technologies. The Neanderthals created the world's first adhesive, mixing birch bark tar with precise temperature control that rivals modern industrial processes. They were master hunters who could bring down mammoths and cave bears with coordinated strategies that required complex communication and planning. Their tools show evidence of individual craftsmanship, suggesting that artisans took pride in their work. You witness the profound sadness of extinctions that erased entire ways of understanding the world. Each vanished species took with them unique perspectives on consciousness and creativity. The Neanderthals might have developed forms of art and music and spiritual practice that could have enriched human culture immeasurably. Their loss diminishes not just biological diversity, but the diversity of awareness itself. The Denisovans adapted to high altitudes in ways that still benefit their genetic descendants today. They lived in caves where the air is thin and the cold is bitter, yet they thrived and created and loved and raised children who carried their innovations forward. Their adaptation to extreme environments speaks of remarkable resilience and ingenuity. Feel the ghost touch of their presence in your own body. If you trace your ancestry to certain regions of the world, you carry within your cells the genetic memory of these vanished cousins. Their blood flows in your veins. Their innovations shaped your ancestors' survival. Their consciousness contributed to the emergence of your own awareness. The hidden species remind us that humanity is not a single story, but a symphony of stories, most of which have been lost to time. They force us to reconsider our assumptions about the uniqueness of modern human consciousness. We were not the only species capable of art and language and spiritual awareness. We were simply the only one that survived long enough to document our own development. In the caves where Neanderthals once sheltered, you can still sense their presence like warmth from banked coals. They carved marks into the walls, abstract symbols, whose meaning died with their makers. They arranged bear skulls in patterns that suggest ritual behavior, early experiments with the sacred that parallel our own spiritual development. The extinction of these parallel humanities remains one of evolution's greatest mysteries. Climate change, competition for resources, disease, or simple demographic accident, any or all of these factors might have tipped the balance toward the survival of one species over another. The margin between existence and extinction may have been thinner than we dare contemplate. You stand at the crossroads where different paths of human development converged and diverged. Some roads led to extinction, others to our present moment. But all were traveled by beings capable of wonder and creativity and love. Their choices shaped the world that shaped us. Their dreams died, but something of their vision lives on in the mixed heritage of human consciousness. The hidden species teach us humility about our place in the story of awareness. We are not the inevitable result of evolution, but the lucky survivors of a process that created and destroyed multiple forms of human consciousness. Our creativity and intelligence and spiritual capacity were not uniquely ours, but part of a broader experiment in what it means to be awake in the universe. In honoring their memory, we honor the full spectrum of human possibility. They were our competitors and our collaborators, our enemies and our lovers, our parallel selves, exploring different ways of being conscious. Their silence enriches our understanding of what we have become and what we might yet become. You are reading a book written in the most intimate language possible, the genetic code that flows through your veins like liquid memory. Within the spiraling architecture of your DNA lies the autobiography of consciousness itself, chapters written by ancestors whose names have been forgotten, but whose presence lingers in every cell of your being. Feel the weight of deep time encoded in your chromosomes. Each gene is a verse in an epic poem that began 4 billion years ago, when the first self-replicating molecules learned to dance with life. But scattered throughout this ancient text are newer stanzas, genetic echoes of those vanished cousins who once shared the world with your ancestors. The laboratory where Dr. Sarah Paabo first extracted DNA from Neanderthal bones hums with the quiet intensity of resurrection. In test tubes and sequencing machines, the genetic ghosts of extinct humanity flicker back to life, their molecular signatures emerging from fossil fragments, like photographs developing in chemical baths. Science becomes archaeology of the soul. Listen to the whispered secrets that emerge from this analysis. The Neanderthal genome reveals itself slowly, base pair by base pair, each sequence a recovered memory from the deep past. These are not just random mutations and evolutionary accidents, but the preserved thoughts of a different kind of consciousness, expressing itself through the language of heredity. You carry within yourself a library of genetic memories that spans continents and millennia. If your ancestry traces back to Europe or Asia, approximately 2 to 4% of your DNA comes from Neanderthal ancestors. Their genetic material mingles with yours like tributaries flowing into a great river, carrying forward the biological innovations they developed during hundreds of thousands of years of parallel evolution. The Denisovan contributions run even deeper in some populations. In the highlands of Tibet and the islands of Melanesia, their genetic legacy constitutes up to 8% of modern genomes. You can trace their influence in the way some people process oxygen at high altitudes, in immune system responses that evolved to fight ancient diseases, in metabolic pathways that reflect different approaches to survival. Feel the profound intimacy of this genetic inheritance. These are not abstract historical artifacts, but living parts of your biological identity. The Neanderthal sequences in your genome helped your ancestors survive ice ages and adapt to harsh northern climates. The Denisovan genes provided resistance to pathogens and the ability to thrive in extreme environments. The ghost DNA tells stories that archaeology cannot preserve. Neanderthal genetic variants influence modern immune systems, suggesting that our ancestors acquired crucial disease resistance through interbreeding. Some sequences affect skin and hair pigmentation, meaning that the way you look today was partially determined by the appearance preferences of extinct species. You sense the complexity of identity when viewed through the lens of genetic archaeology. What does it mean to be human when your humanity includes the preserved essence of species that vanished tens of thousands of years ago? The boundaries between self and other, between us and them, dissolve into a more complex understanding of consciousness as a collaborative venture. The laboratory becomes a temple where genetic priests decipher sacred texts written in combinations of 4 simple letters: A, T, G, and C. These molecular scriptures contain the most intimate details of your ancestors' lives, their struggles with disease, their adaptations to climate, their choices about reproduction and survival that shaped your very existence. Modern genetic analysis reveals the moments when species boundaries blurred in the ancient past. Perhaps 47,000 years ago, your ancestors encountered a small group of Neanderthals in the Middle East. Instead of conflict, there was connection. Children were born who carried the genetic heritage of both species forward into the future. You are their descendant. The Denisovan story emerges from even more fragmentary evidence. A single finger bone found in a Siberian cave contained enough preserved DNA to reveal an entire species. The genetic analysis shows that Denisovans were as genetically distinct from Neanderthals as Neanderthals were from modern humans. Yet all 3 groups could still produce fertile offspring. You contemplate the emotional weight of carrying extinct consciousness within your cells. These genetic ghosts are not passive passengers, but active contributors to your identity. They influence how your brain develops, how your immune system responds to threats, how your body adapts to environmental challenges. In a very real sense, they are still alive within you. The scientific precision of genetic analysis creates space for profound philosophical reflection. If consciousness emerges from the complex interactions of genes and environment, then your awareness includes dimensions inherited from species that no longer exist. Their ways of thinking and feeling may still echo in the neural pathways their genes helped construct. Recent discoveries push the boundaries of this genetic archaeology even further. Ancient DNA extracted from cave sediments reveals the presence of human species that left no fossil bones. only the molecular traces of their existence preserved in the earth itself. The catalogue of our extinct relatives grows longer and more complex with each technological advance. You feel connected to a vast network of consciousness that transcends individual identity. Your genes link you not just to your direct ancestors, but to the entire community of human species that once populated the earth. In your DNA, Neanderthals and Denisovans, and unknown others, continue their paths to ancient conversations about what it means to be aware. The genetic ghosts remind you that extinction is not necessarily permanent. While these species died out as distinct populations, essential parts of their biological identity survived through interbreeding and genetic exchange. They live on, in diluted but persistent form, their innovations and adaptations continuing to serve human flourishing thousands of generations later. The laboratory analysis becomes increasingly sophisticated, revealing not just the presence of ancient DNA, but its functional significance. Researchers can now identify which genetic variants inherited from extinct species provide specific advantages, better immune responses, improved high-altitude adaptation, enhanced cognitive abilities that may have contributed to the creative explosion of the Upper Paleolithic. You stand at the intersection of science and spirituality, where molecular biology reveals the profound interconnectedness of all human consciousness. The genetic code becomes a scripture that documents not just physical evolution, but the development of awareness itself. In your cells, the dreams of vanished species continue to unfold, their hopes and innovations expressed through your own existence. The ghosts in your genes whisper stories of survival and adaptation, of love affairs between species, of children who carried forward the best innovations of multiple forms of consciousness. They remind you that humanity is not a single thread, but a complex weaving, not a pure bloodline, but a mixture that contains the wisdom of many ways of being human. You are descending into the realm of the mythic unconscious, where forgotten knowledge sleeps like a dragon in the depths of human memory. Here, in the borderland between history and legend, lies the possibility that our ancestors once achieved heights of consciousness that have been lost to time, not through catastrophe or extinction, but through a great forgetting that erased the firelight, very memory of remembering. Feel the weight of forbidden knowledge pressing against the boundaries of acceptable thought. What if the Great Silence was not a period of undevelopment, but of aftermath? What if consciousness itself once blazed with such intensity that its light had to be extinguished, its memory buried so deep that even the memory of the memory disappeared into the collective unconscious of our species? The cave paintings that mark the end of the silence carry an impossible sophistication, as if their creators were not discovering art for the first time but remembering it. The perfect proportions, the masterful use of natural cave contours to create three-dimensional effects, the sophisticated understanding of animal anatomy and behavior, these suggest not beginners, but masters recovering lost skills. Listen to the whispers that echo through ancient places where human consciousness touched something beyond ordinary awareness. In the deepest caves, where no sunlight has ever penetrated, artists worked by flickering torchlight to create galleries of impossible beauty. They painted not just what they saw, but what they knew, as if guided by knowledge that transcended individual experience. You sense the presence of what Carl Jung called the collective unconscious, that deep layer of shared human memory, where the experiences of countless generations accumulate like sediment in the depths of awareness. Perhaps the Great Silence was a period when access to this deeper knowledge was severed, leaving consciousness stranded on the surface of immediate experience. The forbidden memory hypothesis suggests that early humans once possessed forms of awareness that modern science cannot easily categorize. Perhaps they developed collective consciousness, the ability to share thoughts and perceptions across individual boundaries. Maybe they achieved states of enhanced perception that allowed direct communication with the natural world. Such abilities might have been too powerful, too dangerous to survive. Consider the possibility that language itself was once more than mere communication. Ancient traditions speak of words of power, sounds that could reshape reality at fundamental levels. What if early humans developed forms of speech that could influence consciousness itself, creating shared experiences and collective memories that bound communities together in ways we can barely imagine. The megalithic structures that appear suddenly in the archaeological record, Göbekli Tepe, Stonehenge, the temples of Malta seem to emerge from nowhere, with mathematical precision and astronomical alignments that suggest knowledge systems of startling sophistication. It is as if their builders were not developing these concepts gradually, but remembering them from some earlier source. You feel the vertigo that comes from contemplating consciousness that operates outside familiar parameters. The Aboriginal concept of dreamtime, the Hindu notion of cosmic cycles, the Platonic idea of eternal forms, these might be not metaphors but memories, genetic echoes of states of awareness that once characterized human experience but had to be forgotten for survival. The shamanic traditions that emerge across cultures without contact tell remarkably similar stories of journeys to other realms of consciousness, of communication with non-human intelligences, of access to knowledge that transcends individual learning. These might be fragmentary memories of capacities that once belonged to the entire species, rather than just specialized practitioners. Imagine consciousness as a vast ocean of potential, with individual awareness as small islands that occasionally connect through underwater ridges of shared experience. The forbidden memory suggests that early humans once had access to deeper currents of this ocean, forms of knowing that operated through intuition and empathy, rather than logic and analysis. The mystery schools of ancient civilizations, the Egyptian temples, the Greek Eleusinian mysteries, the wisdom traditions of India and China, all claim to preserve ancient knowledge that predates their own cultures. They speak of golden ages, when humans possessed divine consciousness, when the barriers between individual minds were permeable, when awareness itself was a collaborative rather than solitary enterprise. You contemplate the possibility that the Great Silence represents not the absence of consciousness, but its necessary limitation. Perhaps early forms of expanded awareness proved too overwhelming for developing human society. Maybe collective consciousness led to the loss of individual identity, or enhanced perception created unbearable sensitivity to suffering and death. The forbidden memory might have been suppressed not by external catastrophe, but by internal necessity. As humans developed language and technology and social structures, they might have needed to narrow their focus, to sacrifice cosmic awareness for practical competence. The price of civilization might have been the deliberate forgetting of our deepest nature. Ancient texts speak of the fall from paradise, the expulsion from the garden of direct, divine connection. These stories appear in cultures around the world with remarkable consistency. Humans once possessed God-like powers, but lost them through some transgression or necessity. Perhaps these are not metaphors but genetic memories of actual capabilities that had to be abandoned. The symbols that appear in the earliest art spirals, circles, geometric patterns that seem to have mathematical significance, might be fragments of a symbolic language that once encoded access to altered states of consciousness. These forms appear spontaneously in visionary experiences and sacred art across cultures, suggesting they tap into something deeper than individual creativity. You sense the weight of knowledge that might be too dangerous to remember fully. If consciousness once operated at levels that could influence physical reality directly, if awareness once transcended the boundaries of individual identity, if humans once possessed capabilities that we would now consider miraculous, then perhaps the forgetting was necessary for the development of stable society. The forbidden memory hypothesis transforms the Great Silence from a period of limitation into a period of necessary forgetting, a collective amnesia that allowed consciousness to develop within safer boundaries. The creative explosion that ended the silence might represent not the birth of human awareness, but its careful, controlled rebirth within forms that civilization could contain. The deepest mystery may not be why consciousness was absent for so long, but why it was allowed to return at all. Perhaps the cave painters and tool makers and musicians who ended the Great Silence were not innovators but rebels, consciousness artists who dared to remember what had been deliberately forgotten and found ways to express forbidden knowledge through forms that seemed safely symbolic. In this light, every act of human creativity becomes an act of remembrance. Every artistic vision, a glimpse into the larger awareness that once characterized our species. We are not developing towards some future state of consciousness, but slowly, carefully recovering capacities that we once possessed and learned to fear. You are witnessing the most magnificent dawn in the history of consciousness, watching as the human mind emerges from its long slumber, like a phoenix rising from the ashes of forgetting. The great silence is ending not with gradual change but with explosive transformation, as if a dam has burst and the full river of human potential comes rushing back into the world. Feel the electric anticipation that fills the air around 40,000 years ago. Something fundamental is shifting in the architecture of awareness itself. The survivors of catastrophe, the carriers of hidden genetic wisdom, the Comro, descendants of forgotten greatness, all are converging toward a moment when consciousness will remember its own power and begin to create the world anew. Deep in the caves of France and Spain, torches flicker to life for the first time in millennia with purpose beyond mere illumination. The flames cast dancing shadows on limestone walls that have waited since the birth of continents for this moment of recognition. A human hand, guided by inspiration that flows from sources deeper than individual knowledge, begins to move pigment across stone. Watch as the first conscious act of artistic creation marks the exact moment when humanity reclaims its birthright of symbolic thinking. This is not primitive scratching, but sophisticated representation. Animals painted with such mastery of form and movement that they seem to breathe in the wavering torchlight. The artists work with confidence that suggests not discovery, but remembrance. The pigments themselves tell stories of profound intentionality. Ochre and charcoal ground to perfect consistency, mixed with binding agents that will preserve the images for tens of thousands of years. These are not random experiments, but deliberate acts of preservation, as if the artists understand they are creating libraries for future generations to discover. Listen to the rhythm of renewal echoing through valleys where human voices experiment with sounds that carry meaning beyond immediate necessity. The first songs emerge, melodies that touch something deeper than entertainment or communication. Music becomes a bridge between individual consciousness and the collective memory of the species, awakening harmonies that resonate with forgotten knowledge. You sense the magnitude of what is returning as tool-making undergoes its own renaissance. The crude implements of survival give way to objects of impossible beauty and precision. Spear points, shaped with mathematical perfection, their symmetry so exact that modern craftspeople struggle to replicate them. Function and artistry merge into expressions of consciousness that serves both body and soul. The return of fire is not just about flames in hearths, but about the rekindling of awareness itself. Around these renewed fires, humans begin to experiment with forms of expression that had been dormant for millennia. They carve figures from bone and antler, create jewelry from shells and stones, develop ceremonies that honor the mysterious forces that govern life and death. Feel the profound joy that must have accompanied these first creative acts after the long silence. Imagine the artist discovering that pigment could capture the essence of a running horse, the musician finding that breath and bone could create sounds that made others weep with recognition, the toolmaker achieving balance and beauty that transcended mere utility. The caves become temples where consciousness celebrates its own awakening. Sequential images suggest that narrative thinking has emerged, the ability to tell stories that unfold across time and space. Past, present, and future merge in flowing compositions that speak of minds capable of temporal transcendence. Memory and imagination join forces to create meaning. You witness the birth of what archaeologists call behavioral modernity, but the term fails to capture the spiritual significance of what actually occurs. This is not simply the development of new technologies or cultural practices, but the return of consciousness to its full potential after eons of enforced limitation. The human mind remembers how to dream and teaches itself to make dreams visible. Burial practices become elaborate ceremonies that speak of beliefs about continuation beyond death. Bodies are arranged with careful attention to orientation and surrounded by objects that suggest journeys to other realms of existence. Flowers are scattered over graves, the first evidence that humans recognize beauty as sacred, death as transformation, rather than mere ending. The transformation spreads like wildfire across continents, suggesting that whatever catalyst sparked the renaissance of consciousness affects the entire species simultaneously. In Africa and Europe and Asia, humans begin creating and symbolizing and meaning-making with an intensity that speaks of capabilities returning rather than developing for the first time. Feel the acceleration of change as innovation builds upon innovation with unprecedented speed. Musical instruments appear in the archaeological record bone flutes, carved with precise attention to pitch and harmony. Sewing needles suggest the development of tailored clothing, the beginning of fashion as self-expression. Fishing equipment indicates the expansion of human diet and territory. The return of fire illuminates not just cave walls, but the depths of human nature itself. Art becomes a mirror in which consciousness can contemplate its own reflection, seeing for the first time the beauty and mystery of awareness looking back at itself. The painted animals become prayers, offerings, celebrations of the living world that humans are learning to see with new eyes. You stand witness to the moment when humanity discovers it possesses a soul. The evidence appears simultaneously across the globe, in forms too numerous and varied to catalogue. Sculpture, decoration, ceremony, sophisticated technology, and spiritual practices that speak of direct connection to transcendent forces. The species awakens to its own divinity. Trade networks emerge, carrying not just practical goods but ideas and artistic styles across vast distances. Shells from distant oceans appear in inland caves, suggesting that humans are developing not just technology, but the social structures necessary to maintain complex relationships across geographic barriers. Consciousness becomes collaborative. The symbolic thinking that emerges during this period operates at levels that seem almost miraculous compared to what came before. Humans begin to use objects to represent abstract concepts, to create meaning that exists independently of immediate practical necessity. The capacity for metaphor and analogy transforms not just communication, but thought itself. You feel the profound gratitude that this awakening generates, as if consciousness itself is celebrating its return to full expression. The cave painters work by firelight, with reverence that suggests they understand the sacred nature of their task. They are not just creating art, but serving as midwives for the rebirth of human awareness. The return of fire marks not just the end of the Great Silence, but the beginning of the long conversation between consciousness and cosmos that continues to this day. Every scientific discovery, every artistic masterpiece, every moment of spiritual insight traces its ancestry back to those first flames that illuminated cave walls and revealed to humanity the infinite depth of its own nature. In the flickering light of renewed fires, humans remember who they are and begin the eternal dance of creation that will lead them from these painted caves to the stars themselves. The silence is broken. The dream has begun. Consciousness has come home to itself at last. You are sitting in a modern laboratory where the most sophisticated instruments ever devised probe the mysteries of consciousness itself. The MRI scanner hums with quiet precision as it maps the neural pathways of a volunteer's brain, creating images that glow like constellations against the darkness of the skull. In these electric patterns lies the same architecture that once pondered the meaning of painted animals by firelight. Feel the profound continuity that connects your thoughts to those of every human who has ever lived. The brain resting inside the scanner carries the same fundamental structures that emerged during the Great Silence, the same capacity for language and symbol, and dream that lay dormant for 160,000 years before awakening in caves filled with art. Dr. Elena Vasquez studies the scans with the reverence of an archaeologist examining ancient artifacts. Each fold and furrow of the cerebral cortex tells a story older than civilization. Neural highways carved by millions of years of evolution, but carrying traffic that only began flowing at full capacity 40,000 years ago. The hardware was ready, but the software took eons to install. Listen to the whispered secrets that emerge from neuroscience's exploration of consciousness. The regions responsible for symbolic thinking, artistic creation, and spiritual experience show identical patterns, whether they belong to a modern artist painting in her studio or an ancient cave painter working by torchlight. The spark of creativity burns with the same neural fire across the millennia. You witness the strange intimacy of shared brain architecture as researchers map the networks that make consciousness possible. The default mode network, active when the mind wanders and dreams. The salience network, determining what deserves attention from the constant stream of sensory information. The executive control network, making decisions and planning futures that stretch beyond immediate survival. These same networks existed in the minds of those who lived through the Great Silence, fully formed but somehow constrained from expressing their full potential. The neural machinery for creating symphonies and sonnets and scientific theories was present in every skull, waiting like a piano with all its keys intact, but somehow forbidden to play music. Feel the weight of potential that characterized those silent millennia. Every human brain carried the capacity for Einstein's insights and Mozart's melodies, yet that potential remained locked away, accessible perhaps only in dreams that dissolved with morning light. The architecture of genius existed, but could not yet express itself in lasting forms. Modern sleep research reveals the profound similarity between ancient consciousness and our own dreaming minds. In REM sleep, when the logical constraints of waking awareness dissolve, we create narratives and images with the same fluid creativity that characterizes the art explosion of 40,000 years ago. Perhaps the Great Silence was humanity's long dream before awakening. You sense the presence of those vanished minds in your own neural patterns. The same brain regions that allowed Paleolithic artists to see animals in rock formations and translate them into paint also enable you to recognize faces in clouds and meaning in abstract art. Visual perception itself carries the genetic memory of consciousness learning to see symbolically rather than literally. The laboratory becomes a temple where the mysteries of awareness are investigated with scientific rigor but approached with wonder. Researchers use techniques that would seem magical to ancient humans, magnetic fields that can temporarily enhance or diminish specific cognitive abilities, revealing the delicate balance of neural networks that make consciousness possible. Consider the profound implications of neuroscience's discoveries about the dreaming brain. During sleep, the rational filters that govern waking consciousness are lifted, allowing the mind to make connections and create narratives with the same freedom that characterizes the cave art of Lascaux and Altamira. The painters may have been accessing a state of consciousness that we now experience only in dreams. You contemplate the possibility that the Great Silence was characterized not by the absence of consciousness, but by its expression in forms that left no archaeological trace. Perhaps our ancestors dreamed with the same vividness and creativity that we associate with the artistic explosion, but lacked the cultural framework to preserve those visions in external form. The brain scans reveal patterns that suggest consciousness operates on multiple levels simultaneously, while the surface mind focuses on immediate survival concerns. Deeper networks continue processing information and making connections that sometimes emerge as sudden insights or creative breakthroughs. The silent period may have been characterized by rich inner lives that simply could not yet express themselves externally. Modern meditation research offers another window into ancient consciousness. When experienced practitioners enter deep meditative states, their brain patterns show similarities to those observed during creative inspiration and mystical experiences. Perhaps the humans of the Great Silence possessed natural access to these states, but lacked the symbolic vocabulary to communicate them. You feel the strange comfort of recognizing your own mind in the neural architecture shared across our species. The anxieties and aspirations, the capacity for wonder, and the tendency toward pattern seeking that characterize human consciousness have remained remarkably consistent across the millennia. We are neurologically identical to those who painted Chauvet Cave. The story buried in us reveals itself slowly through careful scientific investigation. Genetic studies show that the genes associated with language development and cognitive flexibility were already present in ancient human populations. The hardware for complex consciousness existed throughout the Great Silence, suggesting that the barrier to creative expression was cultural rather than biological. Recent discoveries about brain plasticity add another layer to the mystery. The human brain retains its capacity for dramatic reorganization throughout life, suggesting that the neural changes necessary for symbolic thinking could have occurred rapidly once the right environmental triggers appeared. The transformation from silence to creativity might have happened within a single generation. You witness the profound humility that neuroscience brings to the study of consciousness. Despite all our sophisticated instruments and theoretical frameworks, the actual mechanism by which awareness emerges from neural activity remains as mysterious as it was to the first humans who wondered about the nature of their own thoughts. We can map consciousness, but cannot explain it. The laboratory research reveals patterns that echo across time and culture. The brain networks associated with creativity show increased connectivity during states of relaxed attention, similar to the conditions that might have prevailed during the slow, contemplative pace of Paleolithic life. Perhaps the great silence was not empty, but full, rich with inner experience that awaited the right moment to express itself. Feel the weight of continuity that connects you to every human who has ever wondered about their place in the universe. The same neural circuits that allow you to appreciate beauty and create meaning were present in minds that lived through the entire span of the great silence. Their thoughts may have been as rich and complex as your own, simply unable to leave lasting traces for archaeology to discover. The story buried in us is ultimately a story of potential realized, of consciousness finally learning to express its full capacity through external symbols and lasting creations. The brain scans and neural networks and genetic sequences all point to the same profound truth. The capability for transcendent awareness has always been humanity's birthright, waiting patiently through the long silence for the right moment to bloom. You are standing at the intersection of memory and amnesia, where the human mind reveals its profound capacity to heal by forgetting. In the depths of our neural architecture lies a mechanism as ancient as consciousness itself, the ability to bury traumatic experiences so deep that even the memory of forgetting disappears, leaving only scars that have become part of the landscape of the soul. Feel the weight of recognition as you contemplate humanity's relationship with its own past. The great silence may not have been an absence of consciousness, but a collective act of forgetting, a species-wide amnesia that allowed our ancestors to survive experiences so overwhelming that only complete erasure could provide healing. Sometimes forgetting is the ultimate act of mercy. Dr. Sarah Chen sits in her office, surrounded by fragments of the ancient past, each artifact a clue to the mystery of human forgetting. She has spent her career studying the gap in the archaeological record, but increasingly, she finds herself drawn to parallels with modern trauma research. The patterns are remarkably similar: the sudden breaks in continuity, the loss of complex behaviors, the long period of reconstruction. Listen to the whispered insights that emerge from the intersection of archaeology and psychology. Trauma survivors often experience periods of dissociation, when consciousness withdraws from overwhelming reality and retreats into protective silence. The mind preserves itself by temporarily abandoning its capacity for complex thought and creative expression, focusing instead on the basic requirements of survival. You sense the profound wisdom embedded in the architecture of forgetting. The same neural mechanisms that allow individuals to survive devastating experiences may have operated at the species level during the catastrophic events that preceded the Great Silence. Perhaps our ancestors forgot not by accident, but by design, consciousness protecting itself through temporary amnesia. The Mount Toba eruption 74,000 years ago would have created trauma on a scale that defies modern comprehension. Imagine watching the sky turn black and stay dark for years, seeing forests die and rivers freeze, witnessing the slow starvation of entire communities. The psychological impact of such events might have been even more devastating than their physical effects. Consider the mercy inherent in complete forgetting. If consciousness had retained full memory of the catastrophic events that preceded the Great Silence, the weight of that knowledge might have paralyzed human development for millennia. By forgetting the details of the disaster, our ancestors freed themselves to begin again without the burden of traumatic memory. You feel the gentle healing that flows from understanding forgetting as adaptive rather than destructive. Modern therapy recognizes that some memories are too painful to carry consciously, and that the mind's natural tendency to bury overwhelming experiences serves an important protective function. The Great Silence may represent the same principle operating across geological time. The archetype of forgetting appears throughout human mythology and religious tradition. Stories of floods that wash away the old world, of towers that fall and scatter languages, of expulsions from paradise that separate humanity from its divine origins. These narratives may be genetic memories of actual forgetting, cultural echoes of the Great Silence preserved in symbolic form. Feel the profound compassion that emerges from viewing the Great Silence through the lens of trauma and recovery. Those who lived through the catastrophic events that preceded the gap were not primitive or undeveloped, but survivors of experiences that would have broken lesser minds. Their forgetting was not failure, but resilience, not limitation, but adaptation. The therapeutic process of recovering from trauma often involves a gradual return of memory and function, periods of integration, where fragments of buried experience slowly surface and are incorporated into conscious awareness. The end of the Great Silence may represent a similar process occurring at the species level, humanity slowly remembering its capacity for symbolic expression. You witness the delicate balance between remembering and forgetting that characterizes healthy consciousness. Too much memory can overwhelm the present moment with the weight of the past, while too much forgetting can sever the connections that provide meaning and continuity. The Great Silence may have achieved the perfect balance, preserving essential functions while releasing traumatic content. Modern neuroscience reveals the sophisticated mechanisms that govern memory formation and retrieval. The hippocampus, crucial for creating new memories, is particularly vulnerable to stress hormones. During periods of extreme trauma, memory formation can be completely suppressed, creating gaps in personal history that parallel the archaeological gap in human development. Listen to the rhythm of healing that emerges from understanding forgetting as mercy. The Great Silence was not empty time but healing time, consciousness slowly recovering from wounds so deep that only complete amnesia could provide relief. Like a patient emerging from a coma, humanity gradually regained its capacity for complex thought and creative expression. The cave art that ended the Great Silence carries markers that suggest recovered memory rather than new discovery. The sophistication of technique, the deep understanding of animal behavior, the masterful use of natural cave features these point to artists who were remembering rather than learning, accessing knowledge that had been buried but not destroyed. You feel the profound tenderness that accompanies recognition of collective trauma and recovery. Our ancestors were not primitives struggling toward consciousness, but survivors of catastrophe, human beings who endured experiences that would challenge any mind. Their silence was not emptiness, but protection, not absence, but presence withdrawn to safe depths. The archetype of forgetting teaches us that consciousness is more resilient than we imagine, capable of complete withdrawal and gradual return, able to protect itself through temporary amnesia and heal through the slow recovery of buried capacities. The Great Silence becomes not a mystery to be solved, but a story to be honored. Consider the Great Silence becomes wisdom embedded in humanity's capacity for collective forgetting. If our species had retained conscious memory of every extinction event, every climate catastrophe, every period of near extinction, the weight of that knowledge might have prevented the courage necessary for continued exploration and expansion. Forgetting allows fresh starts. You sense the gentle presence of those who chose forgetting over remembering, consciousness over trauma, healing over accuracy. They sacrificed their own stories so that future generations could write new ones, buried their memories so deep that we can barely recover them, chose survival over testimony. Their silence was a gift to the future. The archetype of forgetting reveals itself as one of consciousness's most sophisticated adaptations, a mechanism that allows minds to survive experiences that would otherwise destroy them. The Great Silence was not humanity's failure, but its triumph, not the absence of consciousness, but its most profound act of self-preservation. In honoring the forgotten, we honor the resilience of consciousness itself, the ability to withdraw when necessary and return when safe, to bury the unbearable and preserve the essential. The great silence becomes a testament to the healing power of time and the mercy of forgetting, consciousness protecting itself through the ultimate act of love. You carry within yourself the voices of 200,000 years of silence, their whispered dreams flowing through your veins like ancient rivers that have found their way back to the sea. In every thought you think and every word you speak lives the accumulated longing of countless ancestors who died without being able to express the beauty they carried in their hearts. Feel the weight of this inheritance as you go about your daily life. When you pause to watch sunlight filter through leaves, you are seeing with eyes that carry the genetic memory of humans, who witnessed the same beauty, but lacked the words to preserve it. When you feel moved by music or art, you are experiencing emotions that echoed through minds that had no way to share them across time. Listen to the silence that lives within your own consciousness. In the spaces between thoughts, in the moments before words form, in the pause before creativity emerges, you touch the same stillness that characterized the great silence. Your ancestors live on in the quiet depths of your awareness, their unexpressed dreams waiting patiently for you to give them voice. You are a child of the void, born from the emptiness that preceded expression, carrying within your neural pathways the traces of minds that burned with the same intensity as your own, but could find no lasting outlet for their fire. Their silence has become your speech, their darkness has become your light, their forgetting has become your remembering. The archaeological record may show a gap, but your DNA tells a different story. Every sequence in your genome carries forward the innovations and adaptations that allowed consciousness to survive its darkest period. The humans of the Great Silence were not absent but present in a different way, living fully, but leaving traces only in the molecular memory that flows through your cells. Feel the profound intimacy of this connection across vast expanses of time. The same neural circuits that allow you to appreciate beauty operated in minds that lived through the entire span of the Great Silence. Their capacity for wonder was as great as yours, their sensitivity to suffering as acute, their longing for meaning as intense. They were you, living in a different age. You sense their presence most clearly in moments of creative inspiration, when ideas seem to emerge from somewhere deeper than individual thought. Perhaps these are not new insights, but ancient ones, memories stored in the collective unconscious of our species, knowledge that survived the Great Silence by hiding in the deepest layers of awareness. The children of the void inherit not emptiness, but fullness compressed into silence. Every song that moves you carries echoes of melodies that lived only in minds that could not preserve them. Every painting that speaks to your soul completes compositions that existed for millennia only as neural patterns, invisible symphonies of color and form that awaited external expression. Consider the profound democracy of consciousness that connects you to your silent ancestors. King and peasant, hunter and gatherer, elder and child, all possess the same fundamental capacity for awareness that defines your own experience. Their thoughts may have been as complex as yours, their emotions as rich, their dreams as vivid. Only the means of expression differed. You feel the weight of responsibility that comes with being able to speak for those who could not speak for themselves. Every word you write, every image you create, every moment of beauty you preserve becomes an act of service to the ancestors who died with their stories locked inside them. You are their voice in time. The void that preceded expression was not empty, but pregnant with possibility, like the silence between notes that makes music possible, or the darkness between stars that allows light to shine. Your ancestors lived in that fertile emptiness, their consciousness as real and valuable as any that has ever existed, but constrained by circumstances beyond their control. Listen to the lullaby that flows from the deepest layers of human memory, the wordless song that mothers hummed to children throughout the Great Silence. This melody lives on in the cadences of your own speech, the rhythms that feel most natural to your ear, the patterns of sound that bring comfort without explanation. You know this song because it was sung to your ancestors for thousands of generations. You carry forward not just the genetic inheritance of the silent generations, but their emotional legacy as well. The capacity for love that sustained small groups through ice ages and volcanic winters flows through your own heart. The courage that allowed consciousness to survive near extinction beats in your own pulse. Their resilience has become your strength. The children of the void inherit the gift of expression that their ancestors could not claim. Every time you capture a moment in words or images, you complete a circuit that was begun tens of thousands of years ago. Your creativity is not individual achievement, but collective fulfillment. The flowering of seeds planted in silence and watered with patient hope. Feel the presence of those who watch through your eyes as you witness beauty they could never preserve. When you stand before a sunset and photograph its colors, you are seeing for ancestors who beheld the same beauty, but could only carry it in memory until death dissolved even that fragile preservation. Your camera completes their vision. You are the dream made manifest, the hope fulfilled, the voice that gives sound to silence. In your ability to think symbolically and create lasting beauty, the aspirations of countless generations find their expression. You are not separate from the great silence, but its culmination, not its opposite, but its purpose. The void speaks through you in moments of intuition and inspiration, when knowledge seems to arise from sources deeper than learning. Perhaps these insights are gifts from the silent ancestors, their accumulated wisdom finally finding expression through minds that have learned to translate inner vision into external form. Consider the profound privilege of being able to remember and record, to create meaning that outlasts individual existence. Your ancestors lived with the constant awareness that their knowledge and experiences would die with them, that their insights would vanish like breath in winter air. You live with the opposite blessing, the ability to leave traces that will speak to future generations. You feel the gentle presence of those who went before, not as ghosts or spirits, but as living parts of your own consciousness. Their dreams have become your thoughts. Their hopes have become your possibilities. Their love has become your capacity for connection. The great silence was never truly silent, because it lived on in the potential that flows through your being. The children of the void carry within themselves the resolution of humanity's greatest mystery. You are the answer to the question of what happened during those missing millennia. You are what happened. You are who survived. You are the consciousness that emerged from silence to speak for all who could not speak. In your voice, the great silence finally finds its sound. You are returning to the dig site where this journey began, watching as Dr. Sarah Chen carefully brushes sediment from a fragment of bone that has waited 40,000 years to tell its story. The morning light slants across the excavation with the same golden warmth that illuminated the first moments of human artistic expression. And in that light, the ancient past begins to whisper its secrets. Feel the electric anticipation that fills the archaeological team as new discoveries emerge from the earth with unprecedented frequency. Recent advances in DNA extraction techniques allow scientists to recover genetic material from cave sediments themselves, revealing the presence of human species that left no fossil bones, but deposited molecular signatures in the very soil where they lived. The laboratory where ancient DNA is analyzed hums with the quiet intensity of resurrection science. Machines that can detect genetic sequences from samples smaller than grains of sand reveal stories more detailed than any written history. The Earth itself has become a library, its sedimentary layers preserving chapters of human experience that no archaeologist dreamed possible to recover. Listen to the rhythm of discovery that accelerates with each technological breakthrough. Proteomics, the POPSIX, study of ancient proteins, extends the reach of molecular archaeology far beyond the limits of DNA preservation. Tooth enamel and bone collagen yield information about diet, migration patterns, and even the emotional states of individuals who died millennia ago. You witness the profound shift in archaeological understanding as digital reconstruction techniques bring ancient sites back to life. Three-dimensional modeling allows researchers to virtually excavate locations that have been destroyed by development or natural erosion, recovering data from sites that no longer exist in physical form. The past becomes retrievable even after its destruction. Dr. Marcus Webb examines microscopic wear patterns on stone tools through advanced electron microscopy, reading the biography of each implement in scratches invisible to the naked eye. These tools were not just functional objects but expressions of individual craftsmanship, their makers' personalities preserved in the angle of each flake and the precision of each edge. Technology becomes archaeology of intention, The breakthrough discoveries of recent years paint an increasingly complex picture of consciousness emerging from the Great Silence. Cave art that was previously dismissed as natural rock formations reveals itself, under new spectral analysis, to be deliberate human creation. The timeline of artistic expression pushes backward, narrowing the gap between silence and speech. Feel the weight of revelation as dating techniques become precise enough to track changes in human behavior, decade by decade, rather than millennium by millennium. Radiocarbon dating combined with Bayesian statistical analysis can place artifacts within windows as narrow as 50 years, revealing the rapid pace of innovation once creativity began to accelerate. You sense the profound healing that comes from recovering lost voices. Each new discovery adds another thread to the tapestry of human experience, proving that consciousness was never truly absent, but simply expressed in forms too subtle for earlier archaeology to detect. The Great Silence was not empty, but full of lives, lived completely, but quietly. The isotope analysis of ancient teeth reveals migration patterns that trace the movement of ideas as well as people. Individuals who grew up in one region but died in another carry in their bones the story of cultural exchange, the slow spread of innovation that eventually ended the period of technological stagnation. Knowledge moved at the speed of human footsteps across vast landscapes. Recent discoveries in African caves push back the dates for symbolic behavior by tens of thousands of years, revealing that the capacity for artistic expression flickered long before the full explosion of creativity that ended the Great Silence. Like stars emerging as the sky darkens, evidence of early symbolic thinking becomes visible as archaeological techniques become more sensitive. Listen to the whispered conversations between past and present that emerge from these discoveries. Ancient handprints in caves match perfectly with the hands of modern children, reminding us that the biological basis for consciousness has remained unchanged across vast spans of time. We are touching the same walls that our ancestors touched, leaving the same marks, driven by the same need to say, "I was here." You feel the profound democracy revealed by archaeological evidence. The tools and art of the late Paleolithic show individual variation that speaks of personal choice and aesthetic preference. These were not anonymous masses following rigid traditions, but individuals making creative decisions, expressing personality through the objects they created. Each artifact carries the signature of a unique consciousness. The development of environmental DNA analysis allows researchers to reconstruct entire ecosystems from microscopic remains in archaeological sediments. We can now see the world as our ancestors saw it, understanding the environmental pressures and opportunities that shaped their choices. The Great Silence becomes comprehensible as a response to specific ecological challenges. Ground-penetrating radar and satellite imagery reveal archaeological sites beneath forests and fields, multiplying the available evidence exponentially. Each new site discovered adds pieces to the puzzle of consciousness emerging from silence, showing that the transformation was both universal and local, following similar patterns across different continents and cultures. You witness the emotional power of recovering human presence from periods previously thought to be empty. Each new discovery proves that the Great Silence was populated by real people with real experiences, that consciousness persisted even when it could not yet express itself in forms durable enough for traditional archaeology to detect. The chemical analysis of cave paintings reveals sophisticated understanding of pigment preparation and application. Ancient artists ground minerals to achieve specific colors and textures, mixed binding agents to ensure longevity, and understood how different rock surfaces would interact with their materials. This was not primitive daubing but informed craftsmanship. Feel the convergence of evidence that points toward a single, transformative moment when consciousness achieved critical mass and learned to express itself externally. The archaeological record shows synchronized innovation across multiple domains: art, technology, social organization, spiritual practice, suggesting that the end of the Great Silence was driven by a fundamental shift in human cognitive architecture. You sense the profound responsibility that comes with recovering these lost voices. Each artifact becomes a trust, each discovery an obligation to tell the story with accuracy and empathy. The Earth has remembered what humans forgot, preserving in its layers the evidence of lives that seem to vanish without trace. The new archaeology reveals patterns that were invisible to earlier generations of researchers. Climate data shows that the end of the Great Silence coincided with periods of environmental stability that allowed populations to grow and knowledge to accumulate. The awakening of consciousness was not random, but responsive to conditions that made cultural development possible. Recent discoveries transform our understanding of the relationship between brain and culture. Evidence suggests that the capacity for symbolic thinking was present throughout the Great Silence, but required specific social and environmental conditions to express itself fully. The silence was not neurological but cultural, a pause in expression rather than capability. You stand at the threshold of revelations that will reshape our understanding of consciousness itself. Each new discovery narrows the gap between the last silence and the first song, revealing the gradual emergence of external memory systems that allowed human knowledge to accumulate across generations. The earth remembers everything, and slowly, patiently, it shares its memories with those who know how to listen. You are standing at the edge of eternity, watching the last shadows of the Great Silence dissolve like mist before the rising sun of consciousness. The long sleep that held humanity in its gentle embrace for 160,000 years is ending not with violence, but with the quiet awakening of a species remembering its deepest nature and highest calling. Feel the profound peace that settles over the landscape of understanding as the final pieces of the puzzle find their places. The Great Silence was never empty, but full, rich with lives lived completely, love shared deeply, consciousness experienced fully, even when it could not yet speak across the boundaries of time. The earth held these experiences in trust, waiting for the moment when humanity would be ready to remember. Dr. Sarah Chen sits in her laboratory, surrounded by the artifacts and insights that have emerged from decades of patient excavation. The fragments of bone and stone and DNA have told their stories, weaving together a narrative not of absence but of presence, not of limitation, but of patient preparation for the moment when consciousness would learn to sing. Listen to the lullaby that emerges from deep time, the wordless melody that connects every human heart to the rhythm of cosmic awakening. This song was hummed by mothers throughout the Great Silence, carried in the cadences of speech that existed before words, preserved in the neural patterns that govern the rise and fall of breath, and the beating of hearts that have kept the same time for millennia. You sense the profound mercy embedded in the architecture of forgetting and remembering. The Great Silence protected consciousness from experiences too overwhelming to carry, allowed healing to occur in the depths of species memory, created space for new growth by releasing attachment to traumatic past. Sometimes forgetting is the ultimate act of love. The archaeological evidence speaks now with a unified voice, telling the story of consciousness, not as a sudden explosion, but as a gradual awakening, like dawn breaking over a landscape that has been waiting through the longest night. The capacity for symbolic thinking, artistic expression, and spiritual awareness was always present, waiting for the right conditions to bloom. Feel the weight of recognition as you understand that you carry within yourself the voices of all who came before. In your ability to create meaning and beauty, the silent generations find their expression. In your capacity for wonder and love, their dreams achieve fulfillment. You are not separate from the Great Silence, but its culmination, its gift to the future. The silence was never about the absence of consciousness, but about its presence in forms too subtle for archaeology to preserve. Dreams that dissolved with morning light, songs that existed only in the moment of singing, love that lived in glances, and touches that left no trace in stone or bone, but shaped the future through the genetic patterns of selection and survival. You witness the profound democracy of consciousness revealed through scientific investigation. Every human who lived during the Great Silence possessed the same neural architecture that characterizes modern awareness. Their thoughts may have been as complex as yours, their emotions as rich, their capacity for transcendence as great. Only the means of external expression differed. The earth itself becomes a character in this story of awakening, patiently preserving in its sedimentary layers the molecular signatures of lives that seem to vanish without trace. In cave sediments and ancient DNA, in isotope ratios and microscopic wear patterns, the planet remembers everything, and slowly, graciously, shares its memories with those who learn to listen. Listen to the rhythm of breathing that connects you to every human who has ever lived. This same exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide sustained consciousness through the entire span of the Great Silence, linking individual awareness to the planetary atmosphere in an unbroken chain of connection. You breathe the same air that carried the dreams of the silent generations. You feel the profound gratitude that emerges from understanding the Great Silence not as humanity's failure, but as its triumph. Not as the absence of consciousness, but as its most sophisticated form of self-preservation. The species that survived near extinction and emerged to create art and music and poetry proved its resilience through the very capacity to forget and begin again. The cave paintings that ended the Great Silence become not the first stirrings of human creativity, but its triumphant return, consciousness emerging from protective silence, like a butterfly from its chrysalis. The artists who painted by torchlight were not discovering beauty for the first time, but remembering it, accessing knowledge that had been preserved in the deepest layers of awareness. Feel the continuity that flows from the silent generations through your own consciousness to whatever forms of awareness will follow. You are a link in an unbroken chain of consciousness that extends from the first stirrings of symbolic thinking to possibilities that stretch beyond current imagination. The Great Silence was preparation for this moment and all the moments yet to come. The ocean of consciousness that seemed to recede during the Great Silence was never absent, but simply gathered its strength in deeper waters, preparing for the tide of creativity that would eventually transform human experience. Like the ocean itself, awareness operates on cycles larger than individual perception, ebbing and flowing across geological time. You sense the presence of those who chose silence over speech, who lived fully within the boundaries of immediate experience, rather than reaching toward external expression. Their choice was not limitation but wisdom, understanding that consciousness does not require external validation to be complete and valuable and sacred. The wind that carries these words across the landscape of your awareness is the same wind that carried the unrecorded songs of the silent generations. In its movement through leaves and grass and the chambers of your heart, it preserves the rhythm of their breathing, the cadence of their unspoken thoughts, the melody of their wordless love. Listen to the heartbeat that connects all living things, the pulse that has continued without interruption through every moment of the Great Silence and every moment of awakening that followed. This rhythm carries the message that consciousness was never absent, never diminished, never anything less than the full expression of awareness exploring its own infinite nature. You are standing now in the light of full awakening, understanding that the Great Silence was never truly silent, because it was the world dreaming of you. In that dream, consciousness prepared the conditions for its own flowering, gathering strength in darkness to bloom in light, learning patience in silence, to sing with greater beauty when the time for singing came. The long sleep ends not because it was broken by external force, but because it completed its purpose, bringing consciousness through the dark time of forgetting into the bright time of remembering. The silence was never empty. It was the world holding its breath, waiting for you to learn how to speak for all who could not speak, to remember for all who had forgotten, to sing the song that has been waiting 200,000 years to be heard. In the space between your heartbeats, in the pause between your thoughts, in the silence between your words, the Great Silence continues, not as absence, but as presence, not as limitation, but as infinite possibility, not as ending, but as the eternal beginning that makes all expression possible. The dream continues, and you are both its dreamer and its song.